In just hours, jury selection will get underway in the federal trial for the widow of the Pulse gunman. Noor Salman is facing years in prison on charges she helped her husband plan the attack. To get some perspective on this high-profile case, we brought in our legal expert, Mark O'Mara. Thank you for joining us.
Thing.
And we were talking just a few minutes ago. Of course, jury selection begins tomorrow, and you said you think jury selection could take up to a week?
Well, it's going to, because the first stage has to be individual. So one juror at a time to try and find out things like pretrial publicity. You can't talk about publicity in front of another juror, or else now you've infected that juror with the publicity. So that all has to be individual, and that could take 10, 15 minutes apiece easily. So you do the numbers, they're going to want to get probably between 50 and 100 in the pool that they can then do the more general selection process.
Yeah, and of course they're going to need 12 jurors, and you were also saying probably more alternates than normal?
Well, because you have a high publicity case, so there's going to be the potential for those jurors to be infected with trial publicity. So you have to have a couple of extra ones for that. The trial's going to last probably most of a month, maybe even longer. So you can lose some for that. So if I was the judge, and Judge Byron knows what he's doing, but at least 4, I would say more like 6, maybe even as many as 8, just to make sure this case only gets tried one time.
Tell us about the judge. You, I understand, have tried some cases before him in the past. Yeah.
Well, I've had some cases with him, and also he's a former United States attorney here in the Middle District in Orlando, so I've had many cases where he was on the opposite side. And I will tell you, he's going to run the courtroom well. He's very efficient. He's going to move things along. It will be, I don't want to say an iron fist as though that's a bad thing, but he will move this case along, and there will be no mistakes in his courtroom, because it'll only happen once.
Yeah. This will be different for many of our viewers because it is going to be in federal court. We cannot take cameras inside. Tell us how the whole process, though, is different from state court, which many people might be more familiar with.
Well, it is going to be very similar to most. If they were sitting in the courtroom looking at it, they're going to see very similar to what they see in a state courtroom. The prosecution on one side, defense on the other. Prosecution has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt first, and the defense decides whether or not they're going to present a case. So a lot of that is very similar. The evidence code is quite similar. The rules of procedure is quite similar. One main difference is, and Judge Byron is doing almost a favor to the rest of us looking at the case by allowing at least one camera in the courtroom, but it's not going to be the expansive courtroom coverage that we're used to in the state system.
Yeah, and I know we're talking because you might have to sequester this jury once a deliberation starts, but do you think this jury might even be tainted because we just had Parkland happen, and that's right down the road, and there's no way that, you know, that everyone has not heard about this?
And that's going to be a real problem for the defense. Obviously, because the defense has to make sure that if their client is going to be convicted, she is only convicted on what happens in that courtroom. And remember, this is a circumstantial evidence case. There's no real confession. There's no real admissions. There's some suggestions of some. But this has got to be a case where the defense needs to make sure that the people that they get in on the jury do not have any other outside influences, and one of which is, of course, Parkland. We're still shaking from what happened just a couple of weeks ago. And of course, everything, the fact that Ms. Salman's Muslim is going to be a concern, because there is right now, particularly with immigration that's going on with the administration and whatnot, you know, there's a lot of biases and prejudices that have to be identified, acknowledged, talked about, and hopefully put to the side.
Boy. Well, we will see you throughout the duration of the trial, so thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here. Good to be back.